to be able to discuss kind of our grading practices with the school board and how they align to standards. If you'll give us just a little bit of time, we'd love to just kind of provide some context, a little bit of history at the elementary level, a little bit of history about the secondary process. We'd like to talk about some key challenges that we've had over the last few years with implementation and some of the strategies we've used to overcome those, and then finally just talk about next steps as we move forward. So if you'll give us just a few minutes to kind of set the stage, then we would entertain a fully robust conversation thereafter. So just a quick history on the why, high quality grading practices. It's been a conversation for 40, 50 years. The first books were published in the 80s and have subsequently gained traction across the United States in lots of different places. And the goal is mainly to align instruction to the standards and give good feedback to students on their progress. In fact, our policies, and these were essentially written in the early 2000s, indicate the same. Base instruction on district academic standards, align curriculum with the standards, effectively measure each student's progress towards achieving the standards. So that's OE 11, 2, 3, and 4. So that's one of the places where we get our direction for some of these things. We want to also accurately reflect student achievement. So if students are doing well, they should get feedback on that and know that they are, if they aren't, the same. We want to be able to communicate clearly, both to students and to parents. And we want to ensure that there's as much similarity between classrooms as possible as well. If you're in an algebra classroom with Mrs. Johnson and somebody else is in an algebra classroom with Mr. Smith, we would want there to be some comparability. It's not random luck who you get in terms of what your grade turns out to be. So that's just a little high-level background for standards and how it impacts schools and our timeline there. But I'll turn it over to Shelley Scherl. She has been involved in standards grading for many, many years in assessment, and just wanted to talk about it from the elementary perspective, because we've been doing that for a long time.
Well, good evening. Thank you for inviting us tonight to talk to you about standards-based learning and grading here in the School District of La Crosse. And I'm going to share with you, as Dr. Engel mentioned, an overview of our journey with standards-based learning and grading at the elementary level. And so, as he mentioned, this is a journey that began about 20 years ago for us. So back in the early 2000s, our elementary schools, along with many others in the region, began exploring how to make learning expectations clearer for our students and for our families. And at that time, many educators in our region participated in extensive training at CISA with educational leader Ken O'Connor, and whose work focused on connecting grading practices to what students were actually learning. And from that work came a significant shift in how we thought about teaching, learning, and communicating progress. Our teachers identified essential standards, or our most critical learning goals or expectations in each subject, and then they described them in student-friendly language. At our level, we call them I can statements. For example, a learning goal in math might be, I can solve word problems using addition and subtraction within 100. These statements are designed to be used as instructional tools, shared and displayed in classrooms, so that students always know what they are learning and what success looks like. During instruction, teachers should be referencing the I can statements regularly, helping students understand where they are at in learning. And most importantly, this work shifted our focus from simply documenting grades to supporting learning and growth over time. Students' earliest practice attempts weren't held against them, and instead, teachers provided feedback and multiple opportunities to demonstrate mastery. This was a major change for us, as we recognize that learning can and should continue beyond the end of the unit assessment, and that learning essential standards should continue until mastery is achieved. Our goal is always to help each student reach their learning target. A common phrase that we use is learning is the constant and time is the variable. Our report cards also changed to reflect our focus on learning. We moved away from traditional learning grades and began using performance descriptors, such as emerging, developing, and proficient, to reflect how students were performing relative to the end of the year standard. Early on, after hearing from parents who wanted to know whether their child was on pace during the year, we added an additional mark at the elementary level called on track, which we use mid-year when reporting progress. This indicates that a student is progressing appropriately, and if they continue at this pace, they will meet the end of the year standard. In 2022, we updated our report cards and essential standards once again as a result of ongoing work at determining priority standards and learning progressions within those standards. Our report card is now written using our student and family-friendly I can statements. We also recognize that success extends beyond academic standards, and as a result, we report separately on work habits and social development, because we know these are equally important life skills, such as working to the best of our ability, following directions, actively participating, demonstrating emotional management, and problem-solving skills. We strongly believe that these contribute to student success both in school and beyond, and these standards, when reported to parents, are based on developmental expectations rather than an end-of-the-year standard. For example, listening attentively is different for a kindergartner than it is a fifth grader. So our standards-based learning and grading work has created consistent and student-centered approach that helps students to understand what they are learning, families to see student growth over time, and teachers to focus on what matters most, supporting each child's learning journey. And so I'm going to pass it over to Stacy to share the secondary school's journey, and we do appreciate at the elementary level the ongoing work that secondary is doing to provide that consistency between elementary and secondary with respect to teaching and learning.
I have a quick question. When did you switch the report cards in elementary? Like, how long ago was that?
They were when I came in 2010, they had been in use already for a couple of years.
Thank you.
And every several years, we also will reflect on them and make changes as needed as we update our essential standards in our learning.
And that adjustment that we talked about in 2022, we simplified. We had a report card that had way too many standards. It was multiple pages, and we heard from our parents that we really would like fewer standards in simpler language that we can understand. So we moved to per content area about 4 to 6 standards, and then also moved and aligned to those I can statements that we use with students, because we figured if our students can understand them, then they can explain them also to their parents.
Are they connected to the Wisconsin state standards, like those 6 standards might be the anchor standards or simplified language?
Yeah, so at the elementary, we actually have a spreadsheet that has all of our standards at the elementary level per content area. Obviously, there's a lot. Then we take it and break it down further into the essential standards. And then we take it and break it down further into, and so like when I say break it down, we identify the smaller number of essential standards. We do break those down into substandards, learning, part of our learning progressions, but then we begin to combine those into the I can statements that are reflected in class and also reflected on the report card. So it starts large, it goes smaller, it branches out a little bit more with the learning progressions of the sub-skills that go into that standard, but then it goes back into the I can statements that are reflected in our report card.
When you say we, like how many teachers are in this process?
By in this process,
Yeah,
like
figuring
involved in this, So every content area has a different group of teachers that worked on identifying the essential standards. With respect to like the learning progression, we've done some of that during staff development where all of our teachers were involved in that work. And so it depends on whether you're working on curricular work as a smaller committee or also at times in professional development where we bring it to the whole entire group.
We just want to prove to you that we listen attentively.
Okay. Thank you for that. So yes, Dr. Engel and Shelley set the stage well. I think the changes at the secondary level have come later. We started this process, I think, in La Crosse, in maybe more than 10 years ago, but it's been slow. We're in a good place now, and part of what Shelley and Dr. Engel described, I think about in terms of the explosion of research that's occurred around teaching and learning practices and the knowledge we have about how human beings learn and how the assessment of learning has changed in terms of how we think about that. What is equitable and what is going to motivate a learner who might not learn something the first time to want to learn it a second or third time that they're exposed. So at the secondary level, one of the things that we recognized is Wisconsin is known for having way too many standards for one teacher to cover in a particular course. And so this process of working with teachers by their content area is complex, but teachers involved in professional learning communities, PLC meetings, collaborative meetings, work with the director of curriculum and instruction, each other, me, and other experts that we might consult with to sort of consolidate or condense those standards into user-friendly, essential standards and skills. So I think of it a lot like when I went to math class, it was very different than when I tried to learn to swim. I had a very specific card that described what I needed to be able to do to be able to swim. By the way, didn't do very well. But I was measured daily by my performance, and I knew where I might not have been hitting the mark. Whereas in my math class growing up, I might have gotten a B or a C in the class, but no one really articulated to me from time to time what I really didn't understand on an assessment. So by and large, the philosophy has changed in that manner. The reason for a standards-based report card would be so that you as a parent and the student can really diagnose what standards a student might not be excelling in or what standards they might be excelling in. It helps you as families know what to concentrate on at home. It helps a student dig into something they might need different exposures to. We recognize that one way of teaching may not work for all learners. So a lot of our work isn't about the grading per se, but rather about how we instruct and how we look for evidence of student learning. Not every student is a good test taker, so we look for other ways to observe and assess learning as students grow in a particular classroom. So secondary sort of followed suit with the elementary, but the work that began at the elementary level wasn't intended just to be at the elementary. These are good practices for all learners, even through post-secondary school. Recently, I found myself back in the classroom at Viterbo, learning again, and I was pleased to hear teachers talk about a different way of assessing learning. I can tell you that we, the adults, were the worst students. We wanted to know what our grades were too. What's my grade? And one professor just didn't have an answer until certain learning activities occurred. So that's one of the pinch points that, as we kind of prepared for this conversation tonight, we know that there's at least been 5 things we've identified that we've needed to improve upon. And grading practices become more and more important as students move through the middle level into high school. As a principal long ago, I used to get the question a lot, okay, if you're going to do this standards-based thing, do I still count for a good student discount? Will my child still get that discount if you're going to use these numbers? So I often had to expel that myth. We La Crosse use a combination of proficiency scale numbers associated with the performance of learning with each student, but we also transition those numbers into letter grades, which makes more sense to parents. I think there might come a time where we won't want to convert any longer, that conversion in and of itself becomes confusing, but today you will still see a final report card that shows a letter grade of A, B, C, D, and what we call NE, which is no evidence. Student can't really fail if they haven't performed. So we've changed some of our language to, again, be more motivating for students. So so many things I could share with you, but I think tonight was meant to be a little more of a conversation than a presentation. But we know that one of the infamous questions was students want to know what their grade is. And through the different iterations of our practices, we didn't always have the calculator turned on, and that was done for good reason. We're learning to get away from the mean average, which, as Shelley pointed out earlier, we don't want a student, just because they didn't perform well on the first quiz, the first assignment, the first assessment, and then later who performs perfectly, to be penalized for that. So the mean average can be mean. It can penalize a student who has simply accomplished that proficiency level over time. So we want to honor learning when it occurs. So the calculation changed, which for good reason, we turned the calculator off for a while. What we learned, though, is that's very time-consuming for teachers, and it also adds a layer of confusion for students when you can't see what the grade is. So we have turned that calculator back on, and we have a variety of remedies for teachers to avoid just the mean average. We work with Skyward, who has an algorithm and quite a science to their calculator, so that students can avoid that mean average, but rather see preponderance of evidence of learning over time. So that was one pinch point that we have grown and learned from. That concept of, I don't know about any of you, but I know even for me as a high school student, as a college student, if I sidled up to my teacher or professor and said, "What's my grade today?" it wasn't uncommon for a teacher to become a little flustered and not really know, right? Guessing maybe you've experienced that. So standards-based grading, let there be no mistake, that isn't the reason that a student might not know their grade today. Teachers are very busy people. They're often coaching or representatives of clubs. They may too get behind in entering grades, but nevertheless, the practice that we recommend, encourage teachers to follow is entering grades in the grade book for you and students to see on a weekly basis. Teacher might get behind, may actually be revising something in that grading book, which might be the reason that a student wouldn't know what his or their grade is on a given day. But eventually, a teacher is going to have to enter those grades because we have progress reports and parent conferences, family conferences, whereby we have to communicate that grade. That's what the report card is meant to be, is communication, and time allowed for you to make amends before a final grade, right, is rendered. And at the high school level, we know you're competing for scholarships and post-secondary schools, so that grade is going to be very important to you. Let's see. I know homework has been another concept. I would imagine this has been a concern even at the elementary level, along with this explosion around how do we teach and learn. Is also this concept of, well, what is meaningful homework and how and if should it be graded. I don't think anyone would argue that practice is important, right? Comment, Owen?
Sorry. I would say a lot of the complaint about homework not being graded misses the point of the homework. Not in that it's trying to show that, like, well, you're staying on top of it, but it's designed to help you learn the material so that when you perform on a test, you actually know what you're doing. Yeah. So if a student really needs more help with the concept, you'll give them either more worksheets or more help trying to teach them that material. But if a student understands what's going on and only really has to do a few problems to check up on understanding, especially for review material, there's no point in grading something that is frankly just kind of pointless to that student.
Yeah, thank you. I couldn't have said that better myself. So no one would argue that you need practice, but whether or not it's graded has a lot of discretion with the teacher. We have really emphasized the use of a syllabus and a set of grading guidance for students and families to understand how a teacher's landscape in a classroom is going to matter. Because how a math teacher might handle homework, I mean, I don't know about you, I used to get math homework every day, and sometimes I didn't get it. So I wouldn't have wanted my teacher to count that against me. I would have wanted a chance, okay, I didn't understand my homework. Will I have an opportunity to learn again? So a math teacher may not grade each homework assignment. Rather, they might cluster some of that work and look for evidence over time, may look for performances in the math class, as compared to other teachers who might not have a daily assignment. So there's no one script for that. If I was, my daughters have graduated, but if I was still watching how is my daughter graded in a classroom, I would be looking for that syllabus and the grading guidance that are decisions that teachers make with each other in their professional learning communities per content area. But homework is really important, but the other, when I go to workshops, professional workshops, one of the things I hear, and I know I was guilty of it as a parent myself, when homework is assigned, some students will have parents that can dig in and help and provide beautiful outcomes with that homework. Other students will not have that support. So we rely less on whether or not all students are going to learn, on whether homework comes back high quality. Rather, we look for that evidence in the classroom and provide practice time in the classroom. So sometimes, especially at the elementary and middle level, parents might say, I don't get it, there's no work coming home. I want to see my student busy. So that's just a new concept. I think we encourage teachers to make sure there is opportunities for students to take work home, but it's not what we rely on for a grade.
And teachers can indicate if homework is complete or not,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
there's a way for parents, if that's a concern to them, to make sure that their child's doing the work and keeping up on it, you can indicate that in the grade book.
Yes, yes, exactly. We use Canvas is our learning management system in La Crosse, and not every teacher uses Canvas in the same way, but that's another location where families can be watching on a daily basis and students for feedback as compared to a grade, and they might actually know whether something is turned in on a daily basis and if there was a grade or just simply marked done or not done.
And you had mentioned syllabuses. Another complaint we heard was students didn't know how they would be graded in a particular class, and it was confusing for students for a little while. And we, if I'm not mistaken, ensured that all teachers had a syllabus that explained how they were grading this year. And
Right.
I see students nodding. Have you seen better guidance in syllabuses from teachers?
It really depends on the teacher and the subject. I know definitely in the core classes, you're seeing a lot more syllabuses and a lot more information in those syllabuses. But for other classes, not as much, but there's still a syllabus provided.
Okay, that's good to know.
I would say much the same, that a lot of the core areas, because those are your big ticket items, they have very strong syllabus with this is my grading standard, this is the material we'll cover, and it'll go in detail about what it takes to get that. But as you stray further and further from that, yes, it's still they're required, this is what you need for this grade, this is what this number means for your grade. It is less clear cut, and I think it also depends on what subject they teach, because sometimes it's just not necessary.
Right.
You started out talking about average/mean, and I like to tell this story. I once heard of a 6-foot-tall person who drowned in a pool at an average depth of 2 foot.
That's a good one.
One was 10 foot, the other was 1 foot. The average depth was 2 foot, and he was 6 foot.
Yeah.
Another, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say as Stacy was explaining some of the pinch points, we know that communication has been an area that we certainly have developed over the last few years. We've worked with our administrators, our teachers, our content coordinators, our learning lab leaders to have more conversation around, we call it our standards-based huddle. We come together, we meet, and we work through some of these pinch points. So I'd say there's been quite a bit of growth over the last year and a half in regards to some of the systems. We've moved from having our grades in Canvas into Skyward. We've cleaned up essential standards and the language that staff are sharing with students. We're focusing more on assessments, but with that standards-based huddle, our content coordinators always took back information to disseminate with their teams, their content area teachers. And we're able to have rich conversations during PD time around what are the essential standards, how are we creating equity between buildings, so the conversations between Logan High School staff and Central High School staff, so that grading practices are more similar, same with our administrative teams and having shared conversations with them. But one thing for certain was that those syllabus that were turned into the administrators in August, that those were set, and it was very clear and concise as to how grading should be taking place. So we can put more and more emphasis on the teaching and the learning. The grading is the piece and the communication tool that we need in place for our students and our families, but also then how can we focus on that teaching and learning with the students in the classroom?
There were, I think Carrie alluded to it, there were some technical challenges early on. Our teachers first chose to put the grades in Canvas, but they weren't translating to Skyward well, where parents find stuff. So then it was duplicate entry, which was frustrating for staff, so then we moved it over to Skyward. You know, we tried something that we thought would work better, and it didn't. And so then we adjusted and moved it to the other platform. Initially, we chose non-numbered grades, and that took a lot of time for teachers to grade, and they couldn't provide updates to students quickly. And so when we identified that as a challenge, we made a change, and we moved to numbered grades that convert into letters that are the language our parents and families know best. And so, you know, trying to solve these challenges that we arise upon them, we made, decisions as groups, and this included teachers as a part of these groups, to try something, and when it didn't work, we adjusted, shifted course, and moved onto a better strategy. Those are the 5 biggest issues that we've hit, and with that, I would just turn it over to Carrie just briefly to talk about what's next, and then happy to take any questions and commentary that folks have.
I just got a couple questions.
Oh, go ahead.
So we talked about elementary, we talked about high school, but I'd like to know more about the middle schools. And my other question is, help me, what is Canvas and Skyward, like, what's their relationship? I'm confused what you're telling me. Are those tools that parents can see? So middle schools and then the software.
Right. So right now, today, middle school they're practicing with a different calculation than the high school, but we have followed the identical process of identifying essential standards and the grading practices.
Been in alignment with the high school.
Right.
So their implementation has been the same timeline as the high schools?
Yes.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yes. And let's see, your other question. So Skyward is our SIS, or Student Information System. So we must adhere to SIS. I think there's 2 options in the state of Wisconsin. Our Student Information System is what we communicate to the state about our grading practices and the grades that are rendered per course. And Canvas is we selected Canvas as our learning management system. So I'm trying to think of a good way to describe that. It's like the digital classroom. So historically, if a student, as a principal, if a student left their homework or their their textbook at home, or needed it out of their locker, they couldn't get it unless it was physically in their hands, right? I remember opening the school building several times for families that wanted their homework and their textbook out of the locker for the weekend. Now, through that learning management system, what a teacher is using for resources, tools, assignments, the information shared, sometimes even video recordings of the instruction is included right on that digital Canvas page. So a student can log into their class and actually listen to instruction or find their assignment and all the tools associated with it. Each class might use Canvas just a little bit differently. And historically, we played with, like Dr. Engel said, using Canvas as the grade book, because it is one place where teachers are listing the assignments, the proficiency scales, which is what describes to students and to families what learning looks like based on the standard. What are we looking for if you're going to be a proficient learner? And it made sense to us, to teachers. Well, let's just use that as our grade book, and we'll just enter a final grade into the Skyward grade book that reports to the state. Well, it didn't work very well because a Canvas doesn't sync with Skyward. And we ran into all kinds of glitches. For $100,000 more, we might have been able to purchase the next step up, but we weren't convinced that was going to solve our problem. So the decision was made, group effort, let's just migrate our grade book back to Skyward because we must use it anyway. That didn't take away from the Canvas learning management system being very advantageous and helpful for students and teachers. It just meant we stopped trying to use it as our grade book.
And if you want to change a math instruction program, Envision, used to be Prentice Hall, used to be whatever,
Right.
then that's automatically loaded by that company?
Yes, there's a language, they talk to each other. It can be links and resources associated right with the Canvas page.
We would also want to make sure we have the conversation at our district, just so we are identifying our most essential standards. So Envision will identify all the standards when they're covered, in what topic, and we will make sure that we have alignment within the district for what we are assessing specifically. So we're not assessing all 100 standards to mastery, but a handful. So.
Yep. And I hear you talk about Skyward in terms of the system, information system. And then you mentioned another word, but we used to talk about rubrics, so where's
Yeah.
rubrics?
Yeah, you know, you can use the proficiency scale and a rubric interchangeably somewhat, but yeah.
And those would be found in Canvas. So most of our proficiency scales are within Canvas, whereas that is the most meaningful place that you can find specific information or feedback. Our students can find that feedback from their teachers more within Canvas than the letter grade or within Skyward.
I'd just add to that, we use Canvas at UWL, and I've used Moodle and Blackboard and half a dozen other C tools, half a dozen other sort of learning management systems. And the difference at the college level is that you don't have outside stakeholders looking at the grade. It's just the student and the teacher. And so in that sense, a learning management system works like that really well if you're just communicating with the student. It's when you have outside parties trying to log in and check progress that it becomes a problem. Because we do upload our final grade to an independent system that communicates with the whole, UW system, I imagine. They've got data collection through Wings, which I would never want to run a class through Wings. It's a terrible, terrible, unfriendly system. Canvas is very friendly in that way, and is probably implicitly part of like college prep, because you won't go to a college that doesn't have a system like that. It might not be Canvas particularly, but they'll all have a system like that, and students will need to know how to check their grade, how to look for,
Right.
how to do all those, how to upload different things to Canvas. So, yeah, I felt like there was a lot of confusion between Canvas and, that was most of the complaints I was hearing from teachers, is this double entry problem that was creating a lot more work.
Well, and it's understandable. You can't bring every single teacher in a room to build consensus around a decision like that. So while we thought we were making the best decision for all,
It
there
would
are
make
many.
sense if you didn't have parents trying to
Yeah.
log in and see.
For many teachers, that was like, who decided this? Yeah. Scott?
Thank you. Just so I understand, there's still letter grades.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not as frequent, correct? And we've heard, at least I've heard, that some of the students feel that they're not given a fair shot amongst other students who don't have standard-based questions. Is there still do they still get, you know, their ranking and all that? Is there still?
Yes.
And it shouldn't affect their
No.
avenue to going to college and stuff like that?
And completely understand where that fear comes from.
Yeah, the GPA is
right.
still,
Yes, and early on, we brought people in from Viterbo, UWL, our post-secondary schools, just to make sure. And some of you could probably speak to this better than I can. But, you know, you can imagine that post-secondary schools receive transcripts from private schools, charter schools, homeschool situations. So what we are attempting to provide through our transcripts is kind of everything that post-secondary school would need. The GPA, class rank. Part of the reason we still use letter grades is just for that understandability about where a student fell in terms of their proficiency level. So what happens through the use of proficiency scales, those descriptors of what does it mean to be a proficient learner in my tech ed class or my math class? I know exactly what I need to do based on that rubric or proficiency scale. And then based on my performance, it's converted into this letter grade, a range of where my learning fell. So it's not unlike traditional grading practices in that way, but it's definitely more articulate.
so the second part of that, if I may. So, and again, I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. So for those who have also been, if you're a great student, standard-based grading's not really fair to you because you're doing all the homework, you're doing all this. But is it fair to also say that you're probably gonna get the A on the test? And where the other person who isn't really doing the homework's probably not? Or unless they're, you know, just good at tests, they still may, but does it, what's your thought on that process or that theory?
Sure, thank you. So the psychology behind this would really be the opposite of inequality or unfair grading practices. Some of what we've done, aside from standards-based anything, has been the change of about 15 practices per research, great explosion of research around best practice, fair and equitable grading practices. So what I'm trying to say is in the past, you might have been found yourself in a class not feeling like you understood the teaching, weren't learning, but the test is on Friday. And you're gonna take the test whether you're ready or not. The grade is in the grade book, and there was no such thing as being able to retake it. I think if I'd have gone to a few of my high school instructors and said, well, I didn't do very well, could I retake that? The answer would have been a flat no. So one of the practices that we have changed in this metamorphosis has been, we recognize that assessment is often about how well we teach, right? So if students aren't mastering it, they are not learning, we feel it is our obligation to reteach and allow a student to be able to show learning in a different way or retake a part of an assessment to show that he, she, they have learned over time. So, of course, at the high school level, we can't continue that forever. There are some due dates you must meet, and there will be a point in time where you cannot redo or retake an assessment or a learning activity. But the goal here is not the grade. The goal is to make sure that students are ready for their next step in life, whether it be the military, business and industry, post-secondary school. So goal is the learning, and we want that grade to meaningfully reflect learning.
I think you are right, Scott, in that, it may feel unfair, like I'm doing all my homework, I'm doing all the things I'm supposed to, and somebody else walks in and just gets an A on the test, and that's frustrating. They didn't do all the hard work that I did before. It's kind of like, like your driver's test. Some people did their minimum hours of behind the wheel and they showed up and then they were able to pass it. Others have been driving since they were 12 on the family farm. They had lots of practice and iteration and, and then maybe it even didn't do well on the test because they had bad practices that they'd picked up along the way. So that's certainly a perception, I think. And I think to Dr. Everson's point, it's going back to like having more opportunities, like with your driver's test. Like if you failed it, that wasn't it. Like you did get to go back and try it again, and so that is an advantage of some of the practices we put into place that kind of go along with this around the outsides of it. So.
Yeah.
Oh, he's had his poor arm in the air forever.
I will just give some personal anecdotes and some information just of my experiences with it. So addressing the concern of it being unfair to those who put in the work and do the homework. I would argue that a lot of what teachers are doing for retake policies, at least from what I've seen, is that if you have all of your homework handed in and marked as complete, you can then go back and retake the test because it shows you're willing to put in the work to try to grow and expand your thinking, which I think is a wonderful way to do that. And in real life, sometimes people can just walk in, either guess really well or have a talent for it. So like saying that it's not fair because some people just get lucky is not at all preparing for the future. The college application concern, as a senior who's going through the application process, I just submitted another one Saturday, stressed out of my mind. I will say that all of the information that you need, so like your GPA, your class rank, and things like that, are easily accessible in Skyward if you're just willing to put in a little bit of work to look for it. So like I was able to like press one button, it's like, this is your rank, this is your GPA. You can go through, find all your scores for your classes. I also think that it's a very fair way to say, I'm really struggling to understand this one concept in a class. So you could be excelling across the board. You could have all fours in, I'm going to use economics, for example, because I had that class 8th hour today. I could be doing really well with macroeconomics, the role of government in economics, and things like that, but just really be struggling with microeconomics. Some teachers will let you retake sections of a test specifically addressing that. Why would you make a student redo the whole thing when it's just one specific aspect that they're struggling with? I think that standards-based grading opens up a lot of opportunities to show growth in a more consistent way.
Emerson?
Thank you, Owen. You know, oh, sorry, you go, Emerson.
I agree with what you said, and I also think that it has a lot to do with the teachers. I think they're learning along with us how to handle standard-based grading, and I also know that, especially in the core classes, like you just said, if you really struggle on a particular part on the test, you're able to make that up. And even if they don't have it, we have amazing teachers at Logan, and they will take it on to themselves to make one. But as for, again, the college process, I submitted all of my applications. It's really stressful. But I didn't know you could find it on Skyward until right now. But
It's like a Skyward issue.
Yeah, it's just one walk down to your counselor's office, and mine was gone one day, and 2 of them were rushing to help me. So it's, I think, even if you can't help, like, find it or understand it as an individual, we have support staff and, quite frankly, anyone in the school, even the students who want to help. So I think it'll be figured out. You're good.
I just wanna, just so I'm clear, you've never had any other kind, always standard-based grading, no, right? Is that correct? So you said you've been in elementary school for how many years and?
They would have had it at elementary.
Yes.
Yeah, I think in high school the first 2 years were different, but elementary school I went to Northwoods and they were very similar. I remember there was like 3 or 4 I-CAN statements just on every single kind of near the ceiling.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. They're all colorful and cute and
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Scott, I didn't mean to like bypass what you were asking too, and as I reflect on your question, one of the guiding questions that teachers use in our district to sort of guide how they build their classroom, right? The teaching and learning is, what do we do when students arrive in the classroom that already know the material? I mean, it's not common, but it happens. And Deb, you asked questions about the middle level. Having been a middle school principal for many years, those students that do walk in classrooms that already know it can often become very bored. They kind of give up on school in a way. It could be a behavioral problem, or they might just not come. So part of the philosophy here of, well, if I already know it, the teacher is going to help me, guide me where I'm at today, and not ask me to do a lot of things I already know. And so part of our obligation is helping to identify that, and then helping to stretch students who arrive in the classrooms who already know it.
Poor Carrie's been waiting to speak, and then I know Adam has a lot of questions too, and then we can kind of open it up, so I'm gonna let you go, Carrie.
Thank you. And so much has
Let
already,
people know where they are on the docket here.
so much has already been talked about, but as we continue into the future, our goal is to continue to just refine the work that we're doing. We're in a Thanks. A good place right now, as you can listen to Owen and Emerson and talk more with our teachers. We have worked through some really big pinch points, and we are moving forward with teams of staff members through the different committees that we have. We listen to them, we meet with them regularly, have conversation, we work through different problems of practice. And so we will continue through this continuous improvement process. We will continue to review our essential standards. We're working on developing more robust assessments and really building the equity between the buildings, not only through those essential standards and learning outcomes, but shared assessments, so we can have further conversation about the data and our student learning versus a continued focus on the standards-based grading. We're putting more and more emphasis on that standards-based teaching and learning and providing feedback to students, and that grading is just one piece of it. So it's been that challenge from, moving from points and that average grade to what does proficiency look like? How can we lay that out for our students and our staff to share with our students? And I think that's part of why if some students walk in and they have a quick understanding, quick learning, like their learning has really been laid out for them. We are sharing as staff members in our buildings, what does mastery look like for the standard, what does proficiency look like, and how do you as a student reach that level? And here are the steps we can work through. So as we continue to refine our efforts, we'll continue to reflect on those essential standards, assessments. Our grading guidance has been a large piece of the puzzle that we've heard positive feedback on yet this year. And as referred to, I believe by Emerson, this is a learning opportunity for our staff too. So it's been lots of open communication. Stacy and I were in a meeting yet today in regard to some grading, and we're hearing more and more positive from our staff. And it's nice to hear the positive from the students today too. So something we're putting more emphasis on the teaching and learning, and the grading pieces are falling into place as we've worked through some of those pinch points.
Yeah.
Can I go quick before I ask this? As a parent who have two seniors, and I was really critical about this at the very beginning because I got to see the process from when it started until now, and I would really like to thank all of you for your hard work. And those pinch points that you were talking about are exactly every question that I had, and they've all been addressed. I poll a lot of kids when they come over to the house and kind of ask them about it. And the improvement that they've even seen and have related to me has been fantastic. So it's exactly what I said when I was a little bit of when I was critical about it, is like, I get it, because we're not all teachers. We're parents. We're seeing it from the outside in. And it's fantastic that you continuously are looking to improve. So kudos to you. Yeah, I'm really happy with it.
If I could add to that, just kudos to our staff. We've had a lot of conversation in regards to learning, not only with our administrators, but our teaching staff and our student support staff. It's been a joint effort with all of secondary, with our middle school and high schools. So
I've heard from my graduates at Logan High that they're like, we're getting the hang of it.
Mr. Mankey, you're the one who called for this workshop, and I see
Hold it, I gotta get comfortable.
I see you've done some homework on this. I want to be clear, you're one board member here, and so I don't want you, we all have opinions here around the table, but I'm going to turn over to you now because you are the one who asked for the workshop, and you did hand this out. So can you give us some, I don't want you to read this to us, but can you give us a summary of kind of what your thoughts are?
Yes, first off, I'm glad I remained silent up now because I want to hear more from you guys, since I want to hear more perspectives from everyone before speaking out. And one of the things I realized is during this year, I've been visiting both the high schools, specifically looking into standard-based grading, but one of the things I wanted to do that I never had the chance to do was to see you guys in Hogan perform, and I'm glad to hear this right here. one thing I will say is I'm probably the one lone board member who has consistently not really liked standard-based grading, and I am more than likely to confess that too. Probably the biggest critique here of it, but I want to come in here and point out some of the positive things I've seen, and I'm kind of glad to hear a lot more positive stuff over here. But I also want to take a look into the other side. The reason why I wanted to make this report is because this is the number one thing that's brought up to us during the linkages. It's the number one thing I hear from teachers and from parents as well, standard-based grading, throughout the last 2 years. And I want to take a deep dive into it because I think it was something which our board should be looking into the policy about to either completely refine it or to see if it's something that's worth our time as well. And this is something that has been spent hundreds of thousands of dollars for. I had a couple questions about the Marzano training you guys were performing. I want to understand more about your training you're doing as administrators and allowing teachers upon there. But I'll go briefly read through some of mine over here and open for discussion as well. Is some of the positive changes I've seen, and as you guys discuss here, was the introduction of the proficiency scale. That was something which that during the beginning of standard-based grading implementation was very clearly lacking. I remember last year I looked at the old workshop we had from August 19th, and that was the biggest hurdle and the biggest priority you guys had the proficiency scale. And now this year I believe it is refining that. Add a couple of questions kind of regarding that when I came in there, but what I found is with the proficiency scale is that it kind of brought a lot of that letter grade right here. And one of the biggest challenges when they were assigning homework is how exactly do we grade this, as you all said, like that's the biggest thing right there. And this year, this is just from some of the math departments I found. This piece of paper here clearly shows the standards, what they have here. And the other piece of paper, I left it somewhere. I didn't have it with me, but it showed a lot of that. What exactly does a 1 or a 2 or a 3 or a 4 look like? And I was very impressed by that. And I wish I had it there because I wish I could show that right there because that's exactly what I kind of hope to see in standard-based grading is refining what kind of standard is being reflected per the grade. But that proficiency scale was very essential from the start towards implementing standard-based grading, and we clearly have it now. And the second positive change was talking a lot about, going back to this piece of paper here, is what exactly are the standards we are revealing or expecting teachers to give. And that was something, which I remember during the first year of implementation where it wasn't universal. And you all were talking about how you made it kind of universal between the departments. This worked proficiently well in the science departments and the field departments, I noticed, is that every single class, and tell me if I'm correct on this, every single department has their own standard that each and every class has that standard assigned for them that each student is expected to perform well on in each class. Am I right?
Yep, there's standards assigned for each class, each course that we teach, and they should be the same across the grade level, so to speak. So English 9, whether it's at Logan or Central, would have the same set of standards that students are expected to master.
Right. And that I was also very happy to see, since that talks a lot about communication issues and that every single department felt overwhelmed because out of nowhere they were expected what I kind of got from them is that they felt like they were supposed to make it completely anew or try to figure out. They got handed nothing with very little support from last year, and now hearing that this is implemented, that is very good for refinement as well. And the staff in particular over at Logan High School, I talked to their new principal, and he seemed to be really proficient in standard-based grading, and I felt a lot of great confidence for him there. So I want to be fair, I saw a lot of great improvements of standard-based grading, but I also see that this is still something that needs to be refined by a lot, and that is seen in almost all of our linkages. And going on to the hard part here towards negative changes is that when talking to these teachers, there still seemed to be a lot of distrust towards Hogan, almost like it was a hostile environment. And we talked a little bit here about hearing from the committees, but upon going to the high schools themselves, there seemed to be a lot of teachers were apprehensive even discussing their thoughts towards it, is that teachers felt like they'd be retaliated if they kind of voiced against standard-based grading. And that is a huge concern I had towards this, because there were a lot of teachers who said they wanted to leave the district because of this, and they still are a lot of them out there. And we want to be a school of choice for these teachers, but are we exactly providing it for them? Are we enabling student success upon that? And
May I respond to that real quick?
yes,
Teachers have not been hesitant to tell me what they don't like about standards-based grading, and I'm the superintendent, and I know that Stacy and Carrie have certainly heard it from staff as well. May not be everyone, and there's certainly folks that might not be open to giving feedback in that regard, but I have definitely received feedback directly from many staff regarding their concerns, and so certainly appreciate that that is true for some. I would certainly say it's not true for all. And I just got back our staff culture survey that we put out in the fall and the spring of every year. And fortunately, over the last 2 years, we've seen consistent, steady improvement in the positivity of teachers around our school district and their likelihood of recommending the school district as a place to work. And so while there are certainly still outliers and challenges to be had, I'm thankful that the kind of holistic data that we have continues to show improvement. And I'm also thankful that teachers have no hesitation in telling me what they think about policies and practices in the school district. And so I certainly appreciate that what you're hearing is true for some. I just wanted to throw out some kind of more holistic data and a personal experience of mine just to show a different side of that. So thank you.
yes, I appreciate it, but my concern is that when talking about it, it wasn't just, it wasn't just that some of them felt like it was a lot to the level where it rose a lot of concern to me. And my biggest question was, where exactly is that coming from? Because this is very important to have that kind of support from the Hogan administration with standard-based grading. And that's something we saw a lot of the linkages throughout, is that a lot of the teachers came up here and had that platform to speak, said that they felt like Hogan was not listening to them. And I mean, I appreciate that you said you're hearing the feedback for it too, but there are a lot of teachers who are scared out there who did not want to share that feedback.
And I think you acknowledged that some feel that way. Why don't you just continue on with your
Yes.
work? I think you kind of made your point. I'm gonna call on you guys right after Adam's done, if that's okay.
Right. Another one here, and I'm glad this was actually mentioned here, is the formative assessments. I am a big proponent of the fact that we should have graded formatives, because it's not just teaching students to do well on a test or to give them work every day. It also prepares them for the workforce. We hear a lot about how Gen Z doesn't show up for work. A lot of this kind of starts up in our own classrooms, where there was a big push from the administration about standard-based grading, that this would create a intrinsic reward for for students to do their work. What we found was that, and this has been going from the high schools, is that teachers universally, I'd say almost universally, said that their students didn't want to do homework and that they had to force their students to do their homework. And they found strategies like that where I appreciate that. That's something I learned where, they would incentivize it by having, want to take a retake, you better show you have skin in the game, you're doing the homework here too. But without that intrinsic reward, it's not exactly setting up students to succeed. And looking at the March 3rd, 2025 all high school staff linkage, I kind of saw this reflected in this, where one of the concerns was that this is not doing a good job preparing students for college in generals. Finals have been eliminated and moving away from tests in general. Many students not preparing for tests first time, retake a test, ensure they've mastered information needed, and continuously being late and turning in their assignments. Is that this is not exactly building students of character that we want to see from our students when they go on to their later life right here. And again, I appreciate the remarks saying that, you don't have to do all of your homework in order to do good on a test. I understand that very well, but that's not exactly the expectation I think we should be saying to our students here, is that we want to see them build the habit to do the work, so when they go in the workforce, that they're doing the work that it's expected of them on the workforce. You can't just skip a day of work, come back in and do it over again. and just do well. And biggest complaint from previous years as well is that this is supposed to take away the testing from students. Instead, focus on the overall learning growth. How exactly are we growing upon students to see that they want to learn? But it's very circular in that at the end of the day, you still have a test that marks what their grade is going to be, and it's still going to be put as a letter grade. So that throughout this entire process, that is still something that has not changed at all. And why I think a lot of teachers, when they came up to me, and why I asked them too, is that they said that this felt like a very circular process. The implementation was, in my eyes, kind of failing towards, I mean, you said a lot of these things here. I mean, the big growth towards standard-based learning, but you can't transition away from standard-based grading. It's still circular no matter what you do. It has always been the exact same thing. There's been little improvement upon that. In order to have standard-based grading, you need to have good grading. And I think we still need to work upon those core components where the culture of standard-based learning is something that can be developed, but if we don't have standard-based grading, it's not going to succeed.
Mr. Mank, I appreciate you put a lot of work into this, and I don't want to shortchange you, but can you kind of summarize this a little bit better?
Yes. And again, I just have one last one right here, and I saw still some technical difficulties. This was something that is being refined, as you all said themselves too, is that a lot of teachers said there's still some inconsistency with putting a grade in Canvas and then kind of going into Skyward. Is it either under or over estimates it? And that I don't see as being a big problem. I see that something that's largely technical and something that this has been brought up, just implemented this year. So seeing continuous improvement, you talk about continuous improvement. That's something which that I don't think is too big of an issue to say that it's going to completely fail the project right here. But it's something in which I think during refining skills, some feedback for you all is probably focusing on the implementation towards the technical side. But the big picture here is that this is still something that needs to be refined. We're at our final year of our window from last year, August 19th, and I want to know exactly what are the next year, the next couple years through here too. I see a very inconsistent culture of the teachers from Hogan administration where we're seeing communications feedback from, but I'm not seeing that reflected in the teachers when I come over there. And I'm not seeing that in the linkages here. That's been universal for the past 3 years. I think when we say that teachers can come up to us, I think that some of them, I think there's a very big disconnect with the culture of Hogan and the teachers, and that is something which the school board here should recognize and to find ways to improve that, to help you guys help solve that disconnect there. That's my biggest concern from this, is that throughout this entire process, we're kind of putting teachers under the bus here. We're doing a lot of good things with standard-based learning. A lot of teachers like that, but when it comes to standard-based grading, this disconnect right here is creating it circular. It's not increasing the odds or the chances. It's not increasing student success. And the big picture which I got from this report right here is we need to fix that. Open more questions.
I'm going to turn over to the students to speak on, you're the closest to it, and the reason I'm going to turn over to you now is Mr. Mank referred to linkages, and I do recall what I found to be striking, and those who were, several board members were in attendance, one of the high schools said, the majority of the students at that linkage said, we hate the standard-based grading, and the other school said at least half of the students, probably more, hate it. And it wasn't like we aren't okay with it, like they kind of hated it. So I know there have been changes and improvements this year, and so I'd kind of like to hear from you, your personal perspective, what changes you've seen, what your fellow students think. You're the ones at the end of the train here that we're trying to do all this for, so your input is really valuable to us.
Okay, I have notes. I'll kind of start from the bottom up. As for the students hating it, I think they hate what they don't understand. I think that they don't, I mean, they're not here in my position. They weren't able to hear from the elementary schools and the middle schools, and I was critical too, but I was frankly reassured with all the information I got today. But I do think that the students would feel more comforted knowing more of these facts than I think they do. I know you did a similar thing. I talked to a lot of students before today and like asked them what they thought about standard-based grading, and they didn't even really know how to describe it. So they kind of knew that they had certain certain criterias they had to kind of achieve, but they didn't necessarily understand the overall difference from what they were even doing 2 years ago. So I think that they know that something changed, but I don't think they fully know what. I think they just know that other people don't like it, so now they don't like it. But as for student success, I know at Logan, at least my peers, I know we are very successful. I know that I don't talk to all 400 plus people in my school. I wish I could get that access, but as for that, I know that it is, and that was part of the things that I was critical about before this conversation, but I didn't necessarily like that it was easier to get a good grade, because I was one of those students, and I still am one of those students, that I am turning in all my homework like 2 days before, and I'm doing it for all of my classes, and I have a friend, and he doesn't even need to study, he can just do it, and the part of that is luck, but part of that is he's more advanced in certain subjects, and I think that he's also able to go to those students, and that also ties back to the great staff we have, is those teachers are able to give him extra assignments to help him develop more knowledge on the topic that maybe they don't cover in class, which I think that's also really important. What else do I have? Oh yeah. As for students not being prepared for the future, I think there's a lot of outside resources that students have. I think youth apprenticeship, we have several people involved in Logan, and I think that like being on time for your job and meeting all of those deadlines, I think that is setting them up for success, especially in the workforce portion, I think what you were worried about. But also sports, like you need to be on time for practice. If you're not 10 minutes before, you're late. Just little things like that. But I think teachers at Logan have also found a little loophole where they don't necessarily give as much homework, but it's more graded assignments that could be looked at as homework, but it's not graded as such anymore, which I think is helpful too. And I think part of it is just student apathy. Like, we're seeing more and more students who just aren't engaged anymore, and I think that is definitely hard, but I don't also think that the two are correlated. I think that we were seeing that before standard-based grading too, and we're seeing that in elementary schools and in middle schools, and it's really difficult, especially for the teachers who are just wanting their students to engage. I think they're just sidetracked a lot, and I don't necessarily know what is causing that and the uprise in that recently, but I'm seeing it in high school, and I know that that's definitely going to impact the students moving, the students moving forward, but I would be interested to see what's causing that, but I don't necessarily think the two are related fully. Maybe it is a little bit. Who knows? You can go.
Okay, so I'd first like to thank you, Mr. Menka, for putting all this together. I will say some of the things in here I found quite distressing. What I'd kind of want to open with is, how did you collect the data? Were the teachers you spoken to randomly selected, or did you put a survey out ahead of time of people who would be willing to speak with you? Do you have like any figures that would go along with this? I know we are a very numbers-based board. So yeah.
Taking a statistics class, is this?
Actually, I am, but I am
Survey
genuinely
methodology.
interested in the way you gathered this data, because that changes kind of the way I think through the rest of my process.
Yes, and to answer that, I kind of went through more of a personal anecdote, kind of going beyond what we see from linkages. I did not try to persuade the discussion. I simply came in, talked to the principals. They had me tour the classes that I went to. And I simply tried to find time to talk to the teachers, and went outside trying to seek even more in what the teachers they kind of wanted me to. is that I just kind of ask them, what's good about standard-based grading? What do you like about it? And then what are areas to improve? What's your thoughts about it? Like, how do you think the culture is reflected? I asked open-ended questions and kind of just listened to them. I did not try to just persuade of anything right there, because that adds a, you can add a response bias to that. And then I also had the chance to talk to personalized departments. I talked to the social studies department over at Logan High School during their lunch break and had a chance to just have more so of a group session of, well, we know, like, this is something, I am one board member. I'm not exactly here to be the voice of the administration or the entire board. I just want to hear as someone, as an individual, wanting to hear your thoughts, and they gave me their thoughts right there.
Okay. Thank you, because that kind of reassures me a little bit. The hostile work environment and fear of retribution that you brought up, I would just like to say is a very serious thing, and I would like to know if you had any knowledge of times that administration had retaliated, or if there was genuine cause for concern for things like that, or if it was just kind of the hush hush, oh, I don't want to really say anything too crazy.
I think we see that a lot in our linkages as well, saying that it very much feels like all of this is being forced down upon by administration, that there's no way to get any feedback for them. A lot of that hostile working environment that I kind of heard from the teachers came from the fact that there is no upper level communication. Is that, to use a personal anecdote from one of the teachers, is that they don't even know that if the information that kind of goes to the superintendent or goes through the administration. They said that the channel of communication just kind of stops completely. There's no feedback what's going on there.
Okay.
And, I'm happy to hear from the superintendent about things like that, but it was more than enough just by asking the teachers themselves right there that where exactly is this coming from? And that's one of the things I want to ask the administration is they said that they hear this from the committees. Is that why am I hearing this consistently?
I
Is
want
that
to be really clear, this is a workshop on standard-based grading, and I want to make sure we don't get off track about, because I think the term hostile work environment has a number of elements in it. I suspect standard-based grading for staff that don't like using it or uncomfortable using it, say it's another reason. I don't want to derail this conversation
Yes.
on that subject, if
right?
that's okay.
I will add one thing too. One of the biggest comments I got is that it felt like that they were being demeaned for being teachers, that Hogan administration was coming to them and saying that if you can't figure this out on your own, like, why are you a teacher, is kind of like the sentiment I got from
I
them.
was gonna say, I was kind of following up on that. I literally have written down kind of in my notes as I was reading through it that it feels, in that section particularly, more of a critique of Hogan and the Administrative Center than for standards-based grading. But I digress. Also, you mentioned that standard-based grading is actively, I believe it's on either the final page or second to last page, you say that it actively harms education, standards-based grading does. I was wondering what evidence you have for that. If you have access to the grades before and afterwards, or any other outside factors that you may have considered when making that statement.
I'd like to ask you to clarify what you mean by that question.
Yes. Where was it? I have to find, again, I had it written down. You say that standard-based grading is actively harming, grades and actively harming the education of students, and I was wondering where you are getting the evidence for that, or if you have statistics associated with it.
From the changes of standard-based grading, I would say that the largest part of it is the fact that it is inconsistent. That's something that we've seen right here, is what exactly was 1, 2, 3, or 4. No one knows exactly what an A is. That was seen throughout the last 2 years, was the biggest thing we saw in our linkages coming up before, is that, let me try to see if I can pull up from the linkage here. I'm pretty sure it was an anecdote here.
I would offer up that I don't doubt that there were many concerns, expressed in linkages. And that's one of the reasons why we've worked so hard to make a lot of the changes that we've talked about, why we've been very transparent about the challenges that we've encountered along the way. And I think a lot of the concerns that you have addressed in here, some of which are real, we have gone to great lengths to address as we've moved forward. And I expect that in the linkages this year with staff, you'll hear some things about standards-based grading, no doubt. But I would also suspect that a lot of those same concerns will have been mitigated because of the excellent work of our administrators and our teachers.
Right. I will say, too, the largest thing about that is the fact that it is a very much of a subjective thing where you cannot really clearly define, or it's been a real struggle is refining what exactly does your grade mean in the end. Without those formatives, I believe that's the biggest part of harm, is that it is, you don't have any grades besides the test that is standard-based grading is trying to alleviate. I also believe that the subjectivity is, whether it be what exactly is a 1B, one of the things I got from students or teachers saying that, it's a 3.8 equals an A, well, that keeps on changing.
I'm going to chime in here. This is getting off to a place that feels not where it started. Mr. Manka called for the workshop, and we're having the workshop, and Mr. Manka clearly put in a lot of work to put this information together. And so I do want to thank you. I want to thank you for that, acknowledging what is working, and I think what isn't working, I think we have heard. I think you brought up some additional points that are valid for some of the people you've talked to, and so I don't want to discount that in any way. I also want to thank the staff, because this wasn't a sales job. You said this is what's working, this isn't what's working, this is what we're continuing to improve on. I appreciate the students. I mean, even your acknowledgement of, I learned a lot tonight, maybe it would be helpful for the students to learn more. So with that said, I want to open it up to the rest of the board, to kind of hear their thoughts on it so that we can kind of wrap up this conversation. I don't want to take away from Mr. Manka's concerns. He's clearly put a lot of effort into it, but this is a board discussion, so I don't want to loosen up on it. And I believe, Dr. Garcia, you had your hand up first, and then Mr. Bagdeski.
Yeah, I just thought, to Emerson's point, that students can describe what standards-based grading was. I think that's a really good one. I wonder how many of them could describe what the A-B scale was before. I mean, the thing is, we don't know what an A is. We didn't know what an A was before. The point of standards-based grading is to take out those elements that are being evaluated, like, can you appropriately cite evidence for your claim? And then make what's graded those elements, and it's supposed to provide clarity. But I agree, the rollout was rough. It started in 2019. It got strategically abandoned, I know, in some buildings because of the pandemic. And if you wonder what strategically abandoned is, it means everybody drop this, we've got bigger fish to fry. So I understand why it's gone up and down. But it's good to hear that your experience with it is improving. Any of these changes, and education goes through cycles of these changes about how evaluation happens. But I think it's interesting that Mr. Manka's point is that we don't know what an A is, but part of the work of standards-based grading is to make clear to parents and students what I'm grading you on is whether you can use evidence, not whether I like your point. What I'm grading you on is whether you have strong sentence boundaries, not whether your spelling is perfect, because we know some people have great spelling naturally and some people struggle with it all their lives. But you're pulling out the things that you're evaluating, and you're making notes about that so that, as you said, if you miss one part of a test, you go back and just fix the part that you misunderstood instead of having to redo the whole thing or reteach the whole thing. And I would say, I am going to wrap this up, promise. We've taught to standards for years and years and years. I took the CTVS test and the ITVS test. I actually did this lesson with my students just this week and showed them 4 different kinds of report cards that you can get in different systems. And the point of standards-based grading is to make those standards clear to the students in a way that helps them understand their performance on them. So it's trying to make something that's been implicit explicit in the way that rubrics try to do that too. It's another kind of rubric. So, thanks.
Mr. Bagneski?
Yeah, I would agree with what you said. The present system, if you really understood that, between 2 teachers, 4 Algebra 1 teachers as an example, they are totally different in terms of their expectation, the difficulty factor of the sentences, the questions they ask. There is no consistency. So if you ever delve in and look behind the curtain of our present grading system, it is erroneous.
Yeah.
It just does not do what we want it to do. It doesn't necessarily say who learned the material. It says who could do the best on an average of this test. And it shouldn't be. I should say there's 4 things that I expect all students to learn that successfully complete Algebra 1 to do. And that's all we're doing. We're saying you need to know this, this, and this if you want to say, yes, I understand Algebra 1. Previous to that, it was difficulty factor. Some people didn't even cover certain units in algebra or whatever class you have because they just didn't really like them. And now you're kind of forging people to say, these are the things that must be taught to say if you completed biology 1 or chemistry or whatever. So it is much more consistent today. The problem with hanging on to the present old system is that it's tradition. We're familiar with it. Change is always difficult. And therefore, some people are fighting it tooth and nail. But I do think this is a better system than what we've had previously. And if we really look behind the curtain on that system, we'd see all kinds of ill-conceived notions.
I'm gonna turn it over to Mr. Jackson, then Emerson, Dr. Sprague, and then Molly.
You want me to write that down? Keep that in order.
Please, the honors.
I don't want people's arms getting tired.
I just wanted to give a perspective, because my kids, I have a high schooler, middle schooler, and a grade school. And my kids came through standards-based grading for the entire system. So they have never been on the system on the mean average, which is what I grew up on. And really what I see from them is they understand what they're being graded to. They understand the concepts that they're trying to learn, and it shows us as parents where they're struggling. There is no disincentive to do the homework. It's how they learn to get to the actual tests and the quizzes. That's the whole point of it, right? It's easy for us to follow. I know there was some noise when the implementation, anytime, as Jim said, anytime you have change, it's going to hurt, right? Change management's hard. That's why they teach classes, they teach master's courses, there's doctorates that go in change management. It's hard to move change through an organization, especially one that feels like it's shifting from a traditional system to something that feels uncomfortable. But from a parent standpoint, it's simple. My kids know what they're supposed to be doing. The information they need is easily accessible. They know how to turn things in. And as somebody that hires a lot of people within my organization, a lot of them younger, I don't see the the generational stigmas that you hear. People are gonna show up to work. If they don't show up to work, they're gonna be employed. Like, that's just the way it works. I don't see any changes in that generationally. And I've got 4 people on my team that are within that generation that we just hired in the last 3 years. They're great. They're willing to learn. They want to learn the industry. They want to learn the job. They're actively engaged. So do I feel like what's happening here at the district is good? Yeah. Do I think there's been some hiccups? Yeah. I think the administration has acknowledged those hiccups. They're learning. They're adjusting. I have yet to have a teacher. I've had teachers complain about lots of things when they see me in the community. This is typically not one of them. It was. Anymore, it is not one of them. So again, to Tim's point, parents' perspective, I know where my kid ranks in the class. I know what his grades are. I know when he missed an assignment. If I'm an engaged parent. But I think the last point I'll make is this system, if you have a student and you have an engaged parent, it's a great scenario, right? This system allows for students that don't have engaged parents to have a chance. They have the ability to learn. They have the ability to understand what they're trying to get done. The teachers are teaching to what they need to get done, and you can see it done in bite-sized chunks, right? And they're teaching to learn. My kids aren't really focused on their grades, they're focused on the learning. And again, we're an engaged parent. That's the way it works. But for the kids that don't have engaged parents, I think this is a much better way for them to be able to see, how do I learn this concept? How do I learn this standard? And it really gives them that ability from a grading standpoint to do that.
I think to your last point, I completely agree. Especially it's implemented in college, in the college classes I take at UWL. I recently did not do good on a test, and so I went in and asked what I can improve on next time, and she reminded me that as long as I'm learning, as long as I'm improving, that's what I'm here for. I'm not here for a grade. And I think that that's hard to hear as a student who really cares about her grades. But it's a reality that I think a lot of us should learn. That if you're not doing great, number is wise, as long as you're learning and as long as you're improving, that's That's what you're here for. That's what you're in school for. But if I may, Mr. Minka, ask you one more question. What exactly are you looking for in relation to grading standards? Like, what in your ideal world, what would be fixed? Because I think we've answered most of them, I think, as to the teachers are giving us syllabuses, and on the math sheet, that looks really familiar to Mr. Morrell's math sheet, but that they are saying at the top, and they are saying, even before tests, in person, what they're gonna be graded on, and when the homework is turned in, and there's like a certain percent that you need turned in order to retake certain parts of the test. With those out of question, what are you looking for?
So I'd say the biggest thing I'm looking for is I want to see this become either, let's say, it has to work or it doesn't. I still see a lot of issues coming from linkages, and there's still a lot of concerns I've heard towards this. I'm happy to hear the refinement for it, but I want to see the refinement turn into, when we look at our linkages, look at things, I want this to turn into a praise that we're happy to see the changes being made. I want this to see a steady decline towards the fact that, the implementation is going through, there's a great working culture between there. Or if it's something which isn't working, if I continue to see, this popping up, I don't want to see standard-based grading. I would like to see that is my personal opinion, is that if this does not disappear from our linkages as being a problem, and if it's not the number one issue I hear from people, is that we can keep the standard-based learning aspect of it. That's been working very well, but going back to traditional grading spot.
Dr. Sprague.
But, actually, I'll ask the question
Dr.
later.
Sprague.
Thank you. So I've been studiously quiet. I don't think it's any secret. I have telegraphed a lot of, as this conversation has unfolded for the cameras and everything, that I disagree with you and your critique to some extent. And I'll come to my challenge in a second. I do want to touch on, Emerson, I think you put the point very nicely about what is the shift philosophically that standards-based assessment, standards-based learning practices, and standards-based evaluation or grading are asking for students in terms of motivations. Like, the question is, why do you throw a basketball or a football 100,000 times, right? Not because you're graded every time you do it. That's a big shift that we're asking people to make. As somebody who, I was the test taker who struggled to keep up with regular homework, right? The system as it was worked for me. That absolutely does not work for many other students. And so some of those processes, yeah, they're going to take time. And I don't want to rehash a lot of what has already been said really, really well by you folks and by the experts in this that we have in front of us. So I appreciate all that. My challenge kind of from the start with the framing of this discussion is, what is the appropriate role of the school board in this? And I am happy to have a workshop for learning and talking about challenges in assessment and grading styles and schemas for general edification, and so that we know what we're measuring something against. But in the language of the policy that we granted second reading to as well, that is the level of the board's work, of directing the administration to implement, to enact, to research, to study, and to continue developing an appropriate instructional model. That is something that evolves over time, always has. We don't teach people the same way we did 100 years ago for very good reasons. So that is all that policy does. I don't want this board or any board, because we are not experts in this, to get into the business of writing policy that prescribes or proscribes one particular system or course of action that would be available to the administration. What I want as a board member is exactly what I got. It is right and proper for us to criticize the implementation of some initiative, right? And what I want to see from the administration that is accountable to me is proof of growth, proof of learning, proof of adaptation, that they are mitigating the issues where they can, that they are responsive to the needs of their faculty and their staff, that they are listening to parents and the students as well, and I'm hearing that. Right, and I think it's been said by the two parents who have high school students here right now. Mine are still in elementary school. I'm gonna be in Jeff's situation. My students will have come through on this system, right? And understanding the I can statements and how that translates into higher level work. I should be able to do X, Y, and Z, right? If I can't plot a standard regression, I'm trying to use math terms, but I was an English major, so I'm happy to talk about the actual grading systems and things, but I think it's important that as a board, we clearly delineate what is the purpose and the intended outcome of our workshops and then our policy discussions. And that has been the heart of my disagreement with the approach to this. I'll leave it there.
Trevor, thank you for that, because that was going through my head, but probably not as eloquently as you put it, so.
Trevor's good at speaking.
Yes.
Sometimes.
Pretty good.
I also want to, you know, there seems to be kind of like a black and white, is this gonna work or not? When there's probably a lot of gray area and process improvement, right? So I don't wanna just be like, oh, it's not working, let's get rid of it, and also not our job. That's the experts' jobs. Also, I wanna say, I wish I had this in college in one of my classes, cause I went back like and tried to relearn the test every time, and at the end of the year, the professor was like, oh, your grade does not reflect that, but oh well, you know. It's like, come on. So I really appreciate the fact that students have that opportunity to improve and have that reflected on their grade. I have a kid in preschool, so this isn't exactly the same, but my his teacher gave me a list of things that she expects him to do by the end, and he came home telling me he wasn't good at anything once. And I had that list, and I was like, all right, let's start working on some of this stuff. And within 2 weeks, his teacher came up to me and was like, this is amazing. Like, I see so much improvement. And without that, like, list of things that this is what he should be doing, which sounds very similar, I wouldn't have been able to do that with him. So, and then finally, in preparation for this, I kind of went on YouTube and Google and looked it up, and there's a school in Oregon, because it sounds like some people don't quite understand what it is, that put together a cute little video just explaining this is what we're doing now, and sent it out to all the parents, all the students, everybody. And it was very straightforward, very basic, but it might, something like that might be able to help people wrap their heads around it.
So, okay, go ahead, Scott.
I just want to say two things. One, I'd like to thank Mr. Manka for bringing it up. You know, whether it's the format we wanted or not, but I think more than anything, we had a good discussion over it tonight. And I think I, for one, understand it one heck of a lot better than I did, you know, a half hour ago, even, well, maybe an hour ago. It's been a while now that we've been talking about this, but, I thank you for that. And I'm excited to learn that we've come a long way with this, because honestly, when we first started, you know, it was like, you know, an issue would seem like with everyone. And I haven't personally heard a problem with it in now 2 years from somebody. You know, we did hear some feedback in our talks with teachers and stuff, but I have the feeling that this year's gonna be much better. And hearing from our students and our parents, I have grandkids in high school, so, you know, I really can't talk about my kids because they were A, B, C, D, E, well, not E, but F maybe, a couple of them, but, and I get the feeling that honestly, we're in the right, heading in the right direction, and I'm excited to see even 2 years down the road where we're at. So thank you all for your hard work and continued diligence in making this the betterment of the grading system.
Okay.
I was going to say, as someone who has dealt with the traditional grading system and now standards-based, I will say I I like standards-based more, if I'm being frank. I think it gives students more opportunities in general. I think it's, especially this year, very clear-cut on what you need to do to succeed. I think that it allows for like better nurturing of growth. You can have teachers acknowledge, like if everyone on a test really struggles with one concept before it's, well, I don't really know what the problem is. I guess they just like didn't learn it well enough. And now it's okay. They can go through and go, well, they get everything but this key point. Maybe I need to touch on this. And instead of reteaching an entire unit, they can just go over one lesson. I think it's more convenient. I think it's easier to access once you know what it is, if you know what it is. And I think it kind of takes some of the pressure off students in the best way possible. Not the, well, school's just free now, so like I don't really have to do anything. But especially for students like us, where it's the, oh my God, what happens if I don't get an A? Like you're just, it's a constant state of like fighting down panic before a test. You could know the material and you just still panic, going, okay, well, I have teachers that support me. I know if something is wrong, I know what the issue is and I know how to address it. Why am I really this upset over it?
So I'd like to make some comments, and then I'm going to turn over to Mr. Manka for his last comment, and then I'm going to turn over to Dr. Engel to kind of wrap it up. If you're okay with that? Because I don't see any more hands up in the air. First of all, this was I've been tested now on my facilitation skills, so I'm still stressing here tonight. I want to thank students for being really honest. You weren't prepared for some of this discussion. Emerson, I appreciate your comment to Mr. Mank about what you want, because I think that kind of has helped us synthesize where this is going. And Dr. Sprague, your question about what's the role of the board. And we're a policy board, and but we set policy based on what our stakeholders have said, and we have heard a lot about standard-based grading. So I think it is appropriate that we had this discussion. I also think it's appropriate that Mr. Manka, who's had a lot of concerns, has the opportunity to express what his concerns are and share with us. I appreciate that he acknowledges it's his personal opinion. I appreciate that he has acknowledged that it has to work or it doesn't work, because that's kind of what we do with our policy. So I think that's a fair thing that we can all agree on. And I think that the linkages we're going to hear this year will kind of tell us where we're going. I think that there have been issues, things are being addressed, they continue to be addressed. I think our linkages will be helpful to guide us, to see if they're, I mean, we've heard really loud about this in linkages a couple years ago. It's not as much, and so I'll be curious to see where it goes this year. And I also want to, back to the role of the board, as Dr. Sprague talked about the staff accountable to us, which is only one person. So I hope that the staff here feel and understand that the questions and the conversations we have, I know when we had this discussion a year and a half ago, it felt icky for you, and you didn't walk out of here feeling very good. I want you to know that we understand your work, and we understand your role, and we understand what you've done here, and I don't want you to walk out of here feeling the same way as that conversation left you, so I don't want to take that away. So I appreciate your patience with me in trying to facilitate this conversation, which is one that we clearly need to have, because there's been so much discussion around this table. We needed to have this discussion. So Mr. Manka and then Dr. Engel.
So I got all the perspectives from all the teachers, but I want to ask your guys' perspective. We heard a little bit what's next, and going back to last year, we saw the picture of what exactly was the timeline. We're now at refinement, and you mentioned continuous improvement. So I'm curious here, what are your priorities this upcoming year, or even next year, towards continuing to refine standard-based grading to be able to, I'd say, conclude its implementation?
Yeah, I would say the primary things will be refinement of some of the technical issues. You know, there's still some glitches here and there, and we want to make sure that it's as easy as possible for teachers to implement, for students to access, and for families to understand. So there's some technical things that we still have to work through. And then as teachers are teaching with this method and grading with this way, they're going to identify standards that don't quite make a lot of sense, or they're going to talk to their peer in another school building, and they're going to say, oh, you know, we should do it this way in order to meet those expectations better. I think from what I've seen from our professional development, my conversations in professional learning communities with teachers, a lot of it's focused on assessment now. how do we create high-quality assessments that match our standards and allow students to demonstrate their mastery of those? And I don't know if there's anything else you folks want to add, but
Yeah, on that, because are you done with your comment, or would you have anything else you wanted to add? I just want to.
I just kind of want to hear more from your guys' perspective on
Okay.
things, people who work there.
Just mention one little thing at the elementary level that was a growth area for us. When we started out originally, and I don't know if there's anybody that had elementary kids 10, 15 years ago, but we had lots of standards. And over the course of time, one area of continuous improvement for us at the elementary level has been to continue to refine those essential standards, not that we don't still teach all of the others, but what are the ones that we want to take to mastery. And then we also break those down into more discrete skills for students so that there is a learning progression within that too, so they know what, if they didn't master it, what they need to work on and keep working on to get to that mastery. And so hopefully, when you're at an elementary linkage, you don't hear a lot because this has become our way of being. And so we've been doing this long enough that there's still opportunities for us to refine. We just went through a pretty significant revision a couple of years ago, but it is our way of being. And I would anticipate with time at the high school level and the second and middle school level, that will continue to be, that will refine their practices within this and it'll become their way of being. And the same thing for students.
Yeah, and I would say that refinement is already happening within our within our content areas. We have had several reach out to us and ask for support in refining some of their standards. I was on the phone with the content coordinator for high school science today before I came here, and that was a conversation of setting up a time. We're meeting with art content coordinator, but that's really to refine the essential standards because so many of they're passionate about their content, and so many have identified way more than we really even have the ability to assess. So we're refining those, and now, yes, taking that next step, like Dr. Engel said, to build those quality assessments. So we're building equity between schools, between courses. Biology 1, there will be common assessments, there will be common formative assessments. So those richer conversations can happen. So it could be pointed out, like Owen said, like if everyone missed this problem, it's a reflection of like, how did I teach that as a teacher? And we are very deliberate about the opportunities that we give our staff to have conversations with us. I believe in the power of relationships, and we have many teams that come together with us virtually, in person, through phone calls that we have very open communication with, so that it continues to be the goal as we move forward and strengthen our practices here. I would also share, like we even listening to Molly's suggestion, we have some videos. It was a good reminder. Like we have some videos that we can pull back out and share. Bethany Nugent has created videos. We've had our own secondary, middle school, and high school administrators share information. But I think that will also bridge the gap of knowing what it is. And it's not just the grading piece, it's that how are we laying out what it looks like, what our teachers are teaching, and how we support them in that process is important.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, part of the reason we know what to improve upon is teacher voice. And we don't always agree. Someone brought up, the study of the cycle of change, and it is hard. When you're changing legacy practices, it is very difficult. And I would say, even in the midst of the pandemic, we have been storming and norming, right? That stage of making change for a time. And change is hard. Our teachers have worked very hard.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the realities of the work of teachers is the work is never quite done. We always come back to the table and talk what could have gone better, or do we need to rearrange the essential standards and what we're looking for in skills. And I think in turn, teachers listen to students. I mean, you are great teachers for us to know what works and what doesn't. But I think where we're at in the school district of La Crosse, I'm proud. We are proud. I think we're growing to a very progressive teaching and learning model. So I'm excited for the future. as we refine. We need to do a good job of supporting each other and championing the change, because it is very hard and has been hard on teachers. I've probably shared this with you before, the little red grade book I was handed a long time ago, very simple as compared to what teachers click into now, and there's just mega opportunities to grade any which way. I mean, there's a lot of options in a digital grade book that make it very complex for anyone training a teacher to grade in today's digital world, and for a teacher in that classroom to know exactly how to grade. So it's complex, and I can understand where teachers have been stressed, and we are doing the best we can to listen to that and make the appropriate changes into our support.
I want to thank you, Mr. Manka, for that last question. Forward-looking, what's next? I really appreciate that. Thank you to our students, your feedback. I mean, that's what we're here for, right? It's what our students' experience is ultimately. So I really appreciate that as well. We're a learning organization, both in that we are trying to help kids learn, and it's our job to learn and get better. And we have been consistently doing that, receiving feedback, being honest about where we're facing challenges and our weaknesses, and seeking to continually improve them. Implementation science would say it's somewhere between 3 and 7 years to implement a new initiative. We're at year 5 of our reinvigoration after the pandemic. We're right in that zone, and I think we're in the refinement piece right now, and we're going to be in a really good place very shortly. And so I thank you all for the discussion and appreciate you taking the time tonight.
All right, let's go.
I don't have to do
Who's playing football tonight? Chiefs.